Facebook says that it will limit content and profiles run by Myanmar's military, saying that the army has continued to spread misinformation. It comes as the two sides wrestle over information access in Myanmar, where Facebook is a key source of news. Now, nationwide protest continues across the country since the military overthrew the civilian government and detained most of the country's top elected leaders. The military's hold on Myanmar never really released, despite a brief period of democracy. Today, the junta freed some 1,000 prisoners, but that's unlikely to appease demonstrators. Many accuse the military of using lethal force against them. And our next report takes a look at the events that have rocked the country.
The biggest street demonstrations in Myanmar in over a decade. Protesters want the generals to step aside. They're calling for elected leaders to be freed, and they're calling for a new constitution. That's because the army says an article in the current document allows the generals to take over. When the state of emergency is over, we will hold a free and fair general election according to the 2008 Constitution and hand power to the winner. It's a promise the people of Myanmar don't believe. A telecoms and social media blackout days after the coup did not stop people organising mass demonstrations to raise international support. The police responded. The military said it didn't use lethal weapons on demonstrators on Tuesday. But Amnesty International says police recklessly targeted protesters with no respect for their lives or safety. This video shows riot police trying to disperse a protest in the capital, Naypyidaw. A protester wearing a red shirt and a motorbike helmet shelters with others at a bus stop. Moments later, she's slumped on the ground, and fellow protesters try to help her. Banners on the flyover capture that moment. Doctors told reporters that a bullet penetrated her skull and her condition is critical. Demonstrators are holding photos of what they say are her injuries. The army has banned large gatherings. The authorities say this peaceful protest outside the Chinese embassy is illegal. China supported Myanmar's military dictatorship for decades, even as the international community shunned the country over human rights abuses. The army conceded some power to a civilian government in 2015, but they never truly left. Memories of brutal military rule are still fresh in people's minds.
And let's bring in Hlaing, who researches Myanmar for Amnesty International. She joins us now from London. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. We're seeing these fresh protests and demands for release of Aung San Suu Kyi. How do you see the situation developing? And do you have any more information about Suu Kyi?
It's a very dangerous situation in Myanmar at the moment, and it deserves top billing in the international community. In terms of Aung San Suu Kyi, we're still not sure where she's being held, as is the case with many others who have been detained. There have been sweeping arrests, at least 220, and there were reports more overnight, which we're seeking to confirm at the moment. So the number of people who've been detained is very high, and the situation there is very combustible. As we've seen the use of potentially lethal force against protesters, it's really just unacceptable.
Tell us a little bit more about that, because the military, for its part, it denies that lethal force is being used systematically. But, you know, we've heard in our piece that your organization, Amnesty, says that police have targeted protesters with apparently no respect for lives or safety. Do you have evidence of lethal force being used?
The incident in question in Naypyidaw, the capital, was filmed. We were able to geolocate where the incident took place. We saw that they were using an Uzi, a locally made clone of an Uzi weapon, and it appears that the shells would indicate it was live ammunition and not rubber bullets. So that is something that we've been following closely, because that is the first, as far as we can tell, the first use of live ammunition against protesters. But we've also seen them using water cannons and other disproportionate force in trying to quell the protests.
There are other efforts underway to counter the military. We know Facebook is now getting involved. We just heard about those initiatives. The company says that it will restrict distribution of content and profiles run by Myanmar's military. To what extent do you think that this could have an impact on the course of events now going forward?
That platform has been weaponized in the country by the military in the past for propaganda purposes, but also it plays an important role for people in terms of freedom of expression and access to information. In Myanmar, Facebook has become, for many people, the internet. So for it to be blocked or banned is really an infringement on the right to freedom of expression.
Okay. The UN Deputy Human Rights Chief is saying the following, speaking out about this, saying that the military's presence on the streets is growing, in fact, and issuing, quote, draconian orders against freedom of speech. And I'd like to ask you now, the military has promised elections in 1 year's time. When you hear those promises from the military, what do you think?
This is a military with a long history of impunity, and Amnesty's primary concern is always human rights rather than political systems. We're trying to monitor the situation as best we can, but we have huge concerns. There are over 300,000 people displaced by conflict nationwide. There's over 600,000 Rohingya effectively interned in Rakhine State. So this is a massive human rights issue for us.
Hlaing at Amnesty International, thank you so much for joining us to share that perspective.